Oh dear.
Yeah, we could actually be doing that. Okay. Okay, you're very welcome to this, which is our 5th live webcast. Live webcast?
Oh, live.
Live webcast over breakfast, dealing with the very serious issue of reorganisation and organisational change. Last week we were dealing with redundancies, and we did it in a kind of a very broad spectrum and covered lots of issues in relation to that. Today we thought what we would do is, and actually trying to put some life into that, and I suppose looking at it in reality, tangibility into it, we would look at it from the perspective of doing a case study. So we have here today, with me, I'm Peter Finnegan, Managing Director of Communicate International. We've got Mick O'Connell here. You've met Mick before. We've got our special guest here, Frank Drum, back again at enormous expense, Frank. And we've got Martin Farrelly here as well, again an expert in this area. Just to say that last week we got some very good feedback on last week. Some of it kind of puzzling, if I may say so, because people, even though we're talking about the issue of redundancy, some people came back that it was entertaining. Redundancy is not meant to be entertaining, and they thought that Frank, our barrister here, was, to quote, great gas. So I don't know, Frank. I don't know who said that, but barristers are not supposed to be, especially talking about redundancies, are probably not supposed to be great gas. Anyway, we're going to deal with that today, and as usual, again, if you want to get in touch with us during the broadcast, what you can do is you can get onto you see it here on your screen, and let us know what it is that you'd like to get in touch with us about. Make comments, make observations, agree with us, disagree with us, whatever. A number of queries came in last week that we didn't get to, and came in the meantime as well, and very quickly, as usual, we'll go through those in the beginning just to kind of to get them out of the way, if that's okay, guys. One was that if you have been made redundant unfairly, do you have grounds for constructive dismissal?
Yes. Same thing applies. You can challenge your redundancy on the basis of, is it a genuine redundancy within the meaning of the Redundancy Payments Acts? Is it a sham redundancy? Or more typically, were you fairly or unfairly selected for redundancy? And they're the two main grounds of attack. And if you look at the terminations from the Employment Appeals Tribunal in relation to redundancy cases, that's where you'll find the majority of the cases centre around those two issues.
Okay, great stuff. If an employee has a longer service record but finds themselves unskilled and down the ladder, and they request retraining, if you need redundancies, how do you tackle this? Now, is that basically what they said? They moved on to say, especially if the length of time it takes to retrain an individual may be anything up to 2 years. So it's basically what they're saying is that they're in retraining, I think, at this stage. And if they're in retraining, as part of what they were doing, are they immune from being made redundant?
Well, there are selection criteria that will apply. And in terms of the selection criteria in respect of a particular job, the individual will be assessed against those. So in effect, the retraining isn't part of the mix. That just happens to be a sequence in time. You're looking at that point in time, the individual against a set and agreed number of objective criteria against which you make a decision to deal with what Frank said earlier, prevent challenge against unfair selection.
Not to be too technical or whatever else, but just to say it at the outset, to anchor where I'm coming from in relation to all this. The thing to remember all the time is that redundancy is neutral. It's simply, people don't sort of express it in this way, but redundancy is the termination of your employment by reason of redundancy. So the fundamental is you have a contract of employment, and there's an act that says the employer needs less work, because, as we said the last day, redundancy is about the job, not the worker. But if he has a requirement for less work in a certain place, in a certain way, the way he does things, it's all outlined in the Act, redundancy arises. So it's not something that you manufacture or whatever else. It's a scenario in a company whereby if the employer has less requirement, jobs are no longer needed, and redundancy is like an insurance fund. The original concept was it was like an insurance fund to compensate workers if the job is gone.
Okay, fine. Does the 60% rebate apply if it takes up on voluntary redundancy?
60% only applies on the basis of statutory payments. So there's two types of payment typically in a redundant situation, except for example in the construction world where statutory tends to be the norm.
Okay.
So you get the ex gratia is given by the company at their discretion over and above, often to encourage people to consider actually applying for a voluntary scheme if that's in place.
Okay.
Yeah, the important thing to remember is if you give the required notice period, regardless of the redundancy is voluntary or compulsory, the employer is entitled to claim for the rebate.
Yeah, okay. So there's one in here, in a case where you're introducing a wage cut at the discretion of the employee, is it at the discretion of the employee to take the wage cut or to take redundancy as an alternative?
It would depend on how severe the cut is, and if there's a case to be made that if the cut was so severe that the employee felt that it was such a fundamental change in his contract or conditions of employment that he felt he reasonably couldn't stay in the employment of the employer, yes, he could look for constructive dismissal, i.e. redundancy, on the basis there's no job going forward.
Okay, there are two here that come in again, but also I think we'll talk about them as we're going through, which is what you have to bear in mind when designing a voluntary redundancy program. We're going to be looking at that in the case study, I think. Yeah. And also, I got a thing in here about targeting, meaning you get people who are out there who want to target certain people if there's a redundancy program going on, which we want to have a look and see how that might be handled. If there's somebody, shaking the head, Frank, but managers do it.
That never happens. I've never seen that.
You've never seen it happen. Okay, listen, we're going to look at this. We're going to look at at this case study, and the case study is up actually on your screen there. But I'll call it out so you'll understand. We're calling the company AlphaBeta Ltd, and it's a financial services company currently employing 410 people. Following a strategic review, it has decided to cut the payroll costs by 15%. Now, this needs to happen across all the areas of the company, in the sales, admin, support staff and management. And the ratio of unionised to non-unionised is about 50-50, but half and half. And it's hoped to achieve this through voluntary redundancies, but if necessary, the alternative may have to be considered. So that's where this is at. So maybe picking it up from there and make people can identify with this in their own situations, and we'll see where we take it now from here. Taking it from there, Mick.
Okay, if we just go back to the strategic review, because all the information we have is that they want to cut their payroll costs by 15%. So, just maybe going back to what Frank said earlier, one of the first questions is this a redundancy situation? Their business might have reduced by 15%. Their prices to their customers might have reduced by 15%. They might be as busy as ever. There might be no positions redundant. On the other hand, it's likely maybe some positions, the volume of business may have decreased as well as reducing their prices. So to join the dots here, you'd want to, I suppose, go back to what we said in our 7 steps model, which is to fill up all, review your business completely as part of your strategic review and then plan what you need to do. So I would suggest that as well as reducing payroll costs by 15%, which they may need to do, they need to look at other non-pay reductions like rent, like their own supplier costs, and to have a credibility in their message if they're going to staff looking for redundancies. I'm
taking it here that basically they've cut everything else out of the company. Okay. They're down to the situation where they look at the payroll. Payroll needs to be cut by 15%, and that was the conclusion that they came to. Their vision, by the way, on this here is basically doing the same thing but doing it in a smaller way.
Right.
So they need to cut down the number of people.
But one of the things about your 15% you've got to figure out is where are you coming at 15% from? Is it 15% less people, or is it 15% of your payroll cost?
Of the payroll cost.
Now, so one can inform the other, but it's a good way. It's a good way to come at it. And the third way you can potentially look at it is to say, what's our volumes at the moment? Where have our volumes hit? So if we're talking in 2010, you might say our volumes are 2005 levels. So an interesting reference exercise to do is to analyse your business based on your data from 2005. How many people do we have? How many people we have now? Look at those comparisons. I've been involved in an exercise recently where directors have been challenged based on 2005 in the benchmark data in terms of their headcount, 2010, saying why the difference?
Yes.
Because we're doing the same volume as we were back then. Why the difference? Justify it to me.
Okay.
And exploring it that way.
Right. Okay. We're down to saying that it's going to be payroll and it's going to be people. Now, I suppose the question at this stage we have to look: how many people and where and who they're going to be. How do we decide those sort of things?
Well, I think you decided you have to have a vision of your business going forward. Doing less business with less people.
Yes, less business, a smaller operation, more or less in the same area.
You should have an idea of the parts of your business where you're going to be doing much less work. There could be parts of your business that will be growing or that will be keeping the same. So you would, as part of your strategic review, I think, be looking at what your organisation structure would be into the future.